My own family looked me in the eye and told me my winning $43 million lottery ticket was just a piece of trash. They thought I was a confused old woman they could easily manage smothering me with fake concern while trying to trick me into signing my life away, all so they could cash in my ticket and live their dream life. But they forgot one crucial thing about me, and I made sure their glamorous victory party turned into the most humiliating day of their lives. You know there's a difference between a warm home and a warm house. At 62, you learn these things. I was sitting in my daughter Lauren's kitchen, a place with a heating system so perfect you never felt a draft, but it was a dry, manufactured warmth. It was a house built to be looked at, not lived in, all gleaming quartz countertops and stainless steel appliances that never seemed to have a single fingerprint on them. It felt more like a stage than a home, and that Sunday I felt like I'd been cast in a play I hadn't read the script for. Lauren was buzzing around the kitchen island, a blur of expensive yoga pants and anxious energy. She was arranging cheeses on a slate board, the kind of fancy cheeses you can't pronounce, and she kept telling me how nice it was, just us having a quiet family dinner. Her voice was too bright-pitched, just a little too high, like a string pulled too tight on a violin. My son-in-law Derek was there too, but he was a world away staring at his phone. His thumb was swiping, and I could see this little muscle in his jaw jumping. I asked him if everything was okay, and he gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He said he was fine, just a work thing, you know how it is. But I did know. I knew he was a regional sales manager, and I knew from the way he'd been talking for months, all bluster and bravado, that sales were not good. That kind of talk is a specific language, and it always translates to insecurity. For the past month, their attention had become a heavy blanket on a hot day. It was suffocating. They'd insist on getting my groceries talking about the parking lot at the Market Basket like it was some kind of treacherous mountain pass. They'd started screening my calls, saying they were protecting me from scammers. It felt less like they were taking care of me and more like they were putting me under house arrest, a velvet quarantine. That night, Lauren started in on how I should simplify my life now that I was retired. She'd found a service, she said, that could consolidate all my bills and manage my accounts to take the stress off my plate. I just looked at her. I told her I didn't have any stress. My pension check comes on the 3rd of every month, like clockwork. My little house was paid off 15 years ago. My bills pay themselves automatically. It's the simplest life in the world. I saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before she pasted on that look of practiced concern again. She insisted I shouldn't even have to think about it, that they just wanted me to be taken care of. But the real push had come a few days earlier. Derek had shown up at my door with a thick sheaf of papers. He'd spread them all over my kitchen table, talking a mile a minute about some senior tax relief program and city bureaucracy and red tape. He said it was just paperwork to let him handle things with the city for me. He was so insistent, so charming. He pointed with his expensive pen, telling me to sign here and here and here. I was tired of arguing, and a part of me, a foolish part, wanted to believe he was just trying to help. So I signed. I watched my own signature, so familiar to me, look completely foreign under his intense gaze. Back at their house, as I was helping Lauren with the dinner plates, Derek stepped into the hallway to take a call. He must have thought I couldn't hear him, but in that big, empty house with its polished hardwood floors, sound traveled. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, with a kind of panicked hissing I'd never heard from him before. He was pleading with someone, telling them he didn't have it yet, that he just needed another week or two for the paperwork to be processed. He swore the numbers were good, that it was a sure thing, and then I heard the number, 43 million. He begged for more time, just until the end of the month. I froze right there in the kitchen, a stack of heavy ceramic plates in my hands. 43 million. The number just hung in the air after he hung up, echoing in the silence. It was the exact jackpot for last week's Powerball. And the ticket was in my purse. I'd bought it on a whim from Mr. Rozzie's little corner store, using my grandson's birthday for the numbers. I remembered asking Derek to check it for me that very morning. He'd barely glanced at it, given a little scoff, and told me it was no good. "No luck, Beulah," he'd said. "Maybe next time." By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. The 2 days after that dinner were quiet. I moved through my little house making tea, watering my plants, but it all felt like I was watching someone else do it. The shock had settled into a grief that was like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. It was never about the money, you understand. I've lived 62 years without that kind of money, and I was perfectly happy. It was the casual nature of it all, the brutal efficiency of their lie. They hadn't just tried to steal from me. They had tried to erase me, to manage me like a problematic line item on a budget until they could cash in and move on. I knew I couldn't just confront them. It would be a waste of breath. They'd drown me in a tidal wave of fake concern and gaslighting, telling me I was confused, that I'd misheard. No, my approach had to be quiet. It had to be precise. Their own clumsy amateur greed was the weapon I was going to use against them. My chance came on Tuesday. Of course, they insisted on taking me to lunch to a loud, trendy bistro over in Wayland Square. It was one of those places with industrial lighting and uncomfortable chairs filled with exactly the kind of people they were killing themselves to become. We sat there, them making small talk about their friends' vacation homes, and me just nodding along. Then halfway through the meal, I decided it was time. I folded my hands on the table, looked directly at Derek, and put on the best performance of my life as a slightly confused, harmless old woman. I told him, my voice pitched with just the right amount of bewilderment, that I'd been thinking about that lottery ticket. I mentioned that my neighbor Maria had said the winning ticket was sold right here in Providence at a little corner store. I asked him if that wasn't the funniest coincidence. You could have heard a pin drop. Derek's fork literally clattered against his plate. He shot a look of pure animal panic at Lauren, whose smile became this brittle, painted-on thing. He recovered quickly, stammering something about it being a small world and how there must be a lot of corner stores in the city. I just kept stirring my iced tea, slow and methodical. I said that I supposed so, but it had gotten me thinking. Maybe I'd misread the date on my ticket, silly me. I asked if he could bring it back over that afternoon so I could double-check just to be sure. The air between us felt thick, like you could have cut it with a knife. The panic was no longer a secret. Lauren jumped in first, her voice a little too sharp. She reminded me that I had thrown it out, that they had cleaned out my purse for me on Sunday, and the ticket was old. But then Derek, bless his heart, tried to correct her, his eyes wide with a silent warning at his wife. No, he said she didn't throw it out. He did. He remembered it clearly. He'd ripped it up himself after checking the numbers. It was a loser, he assured me. I just nodded, letting a small, sad smile touch my lips. I told them I understood. He ripped it up. Their stories, both of them lies, hung in the air, a flat contradiction. They had seen the trap, but a moment too late. They had been so focused on the $43 million prize that they'd forgotten to coordinate the tiny, crucial details of their little conspiracy. The rest of the lunch was eaten in a tense, miserable silence. When I got back to my own quiet house, that feeling of their oppressive care felt heavier than ever. They called 3 times that afternoon, each time with a flimsy excuse to see how I was doing. I knew then that I wasn't just a nuisance to them anymore. I was a liability. The mask had slipped, and they knew I'd seen the rot underneath. While they were scrambling in their gilded cage, I made a call of my own. I dialed the number for Eleanor, my oldest friend, who lives down in Newport. Ellie's a retired paralegal with a mind like a steel trap. I kept my voice low and steady. I told her I needed her to come up to Providence and that I needed her to bring the name of the meanest, sharpest lawyer she knew. That evening, I had the locks on my doors changed. The next morning, a certified letter went out to Lauren and Derek. It informed them that the power of attorney document I had signed was now under formal review for fraudulent inducement, and that effective immediately it was revoked. My little probe had struck a nerve. The panic was just beginning. For the next week, I executed what my friend Ellie called a strategic retreat. It's a fancy term for playing possum. That certified letter had, as expected, sent Lauren into a tailspin. She called me a dozen times the first day, her voice a frantic mix of anger and fake concern. I let the phone ring mostly, but when I did pick up, I sounded as frail and weary as I could. I told her I just wasn't feeling well, that the doctor said I needed to rest. All this excitement, I'd sigh, was just too much for my old heart. It was a masterful performance, if I do say so myself. I allowed them to believe that their clumsy power play combined with my little legal pushback had simply exhausted and confused me. After a few days, the frantic calls became less frequent. They'd check in, their voices dripping with a syrupy, condescending sympathy. I could hear the relief underneath it all. In their minds, the danger had passed. The old woman was retreating, beaten down by their superior will. They were safe, and that's when they got arrogant. I didn't know the full, terrifying scope of their desperation then, but I would piece it all together later. While they were relaxing, thinking they had won, their gilded cage was collapsing around them. I learned that Derek would sit in his home office for hours, not working, but staring at a bright red foreclosure notice on his computer screen. They were thousands of dollars behind on the mortgage for that house. They couldn't afford a house they'd bought at the very peak of the market. While I was clipping coupons, they were getting texts from friends about the summer rental on the Cape they'd booked on a credit card that was already screaming for mercy. And my daughter Lauren, she was playing her part too. She'd be at the high-end grocery store, her cart overflowing with organic everything and imported cheeses. Her hand trembling as she slid yet another credit card into the reader, praying it wouldn't be declined. She'd bump into a woman from her yoga class and put on this radiant smile, talking about an upcoming trip to Tuscany, a trip that only existed on a corkboard in their hallway. You see, their desperation wasn't just about getting rich. It was about staving off the catastrophic humiliation of their reality. That lottery ticket wasn't a windfall. It was the only lifeline they could see. Their cruelty to me, I realized, was the panicked, frantic act of people on a sinking ship trying to jettison anything they saw as dead weight. And in their minds, my simple, stable, debt-free life was exactly that. But while they were basking in their false victory, I was anything but frail. In the quiet of my little house with Ellie on the phone guiding me, I was meticulously preparing my offensive. I went through my old coupon drawer, and sure enough, there it was. The original receipt from Rossi's bodega, time-stamped and dated. Proof. Then I called Mr. Rossi himself. I've known that man for 30 years. He remembered me buying the ticket clear as day. He even recalled me telling him I was using my grandson's birthday for the numbers, just like I always did. Ellie, bless her, drew up a formal statement, and Mr. Rossi signed it in front of a notary. It was a legal affidavit. Another brick in the wall I was building. The biggest mistake my daughter and her husband made was a simple one. They forgot who I was. They only saw Beulah, the quiet grandma who made meatballs, and watched her stories. They'd completely forgotten that for 2 decades I'd managed the state clerk's office downtown. My entire professional life was built around paperwork, procedure, and details. I knew the system. I was a master of the very bureaucracy they now found themselves trapped in. They believed they had the situation under control, never for 1 second, suspecting that the woman they had so easily written off was quietly, methodically, and legally building their ruin. After a week of my strategic silence, Ellie's lawyer, a stern-looking man named Mr. Davies, who had the coldest, clearest eyes I'd ever seen, agreed that we had everything we needed. It was time to make a move. He suggested a formal legal filing, but I had something else in mind. I wanted the earthquake to begin not with a loud official bang, but with a quiet, personal tremor. So on a Saturday morning, a FedEx envelope was delivered to Lauren and Derek's oversized front door. Inside wasn't a lawsuit. It was something far more terrifying. We had made a perfect high-resolution color copy of the winning lottery ticket showing my signature clearly on the back. At the bottom of the page, in my best cursive, I had written a simple note. It said, "I believe this belongs to me. Let's discuss." It didn't take long for the facade of their carefully constructed world to shatter. Lauren's call came first. She was trying to sound concerned, but underneath it was a torrent of accusations. She asked me what this was, if I was being scammed, if some horrible person was taking advantage of me in my old age. It was a masterful little performance of gaslighting, but my spine was made of steel now. I told her in a voice so calm it didn't even sound like my own that no one was taking advantage of me. The ticket was mine. I bought it. I signed the back of it. End of story. The second call was from Derek. He tried a different tactic, bluster. He started yelling about how I had no idea what I was doing, that this was a multi-million-dollar instrument and that I couldn't possibly handle it. He had the nerve to say they were only trying to protect me, to protect the family's future. I let him finish his tirade. When he was done, I simply replied that my future was my own to worry about. And I added it seemed my future was quite a bit brighter than his. The final act of their desperation came about an hour later. Their luxury SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house, and they both came storming up the walkway. But I was ready for them. They found me sitting calmly on my front porch swing. I wasn't alone. On one side of me sat Eleanor, and on the other was the man himself, Mr. Davies, looking like a thundercloud in a three-piece suit. That was the moment of the great unraveling. The sight of a lawyer sitting on my porch, calm as you please, broke something in Derek. All that blustering anger just evaporated, and what was left was this raw, pleading panic. He choked out that I didn't understand. His face was pale and slick with sweat. He confessed everything. They were going to lose the house. The bank was calling every day. The cars were leased. And the credit cards. He just trailed off, shaking his head as if the weight of it was too much to even say out loud. Seeing her husband crumble, Lauren just started to sob. But they weren't tears of remorse, you understand. It was pure, unadulterated self-pity. She wailed about how they just wanted a better life, how it wasn't fair that they worked so hard and had nothing to show for it. This ticket, she cried, was their one chance. And just like that, their whole sordid secret history was laid bare on the front steps of the little paid-for house they had once pitied so much. The crushing debt, the terror of foreclosure, the shame of their financial charade, it all came pouring out. I just sat there and listened, feeling the power in the air shift completely. I was no longer the frail victim they needed to manage. I held all the cards. I was the arbiter of their fate. I let them finish until they were both just breathless and spent. Then I stood up. I told them what was going to happen next. I told them they were going to throw a party. I knew they'd been telling all their friends that they'd won. I wanted them to invite every single one of those friends. We would settle this, I said once and for all, in front of everyone whose opinion they clearly valued more than mine. They just stared at me, their faces masks of pure horror. The public consequences they had been terrified of weren't just coming anymore. They were going to be personally orchestrated by the woman they had tried to throw away. To their credit, they threw a beautiful party. It was a perfect monument to the aspirational fantasy they had built their lives around. Caterers in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and tiny, elaborate appetizers. A string quartet was playing softly on the lawn, which looked like a sheet of green velvet. The guests were a perfect collection of their country club friends, Derek's business associates, and all the neighbors they were so desperate to impress. I watched for a moment from the street before going in. I saw Lauren and Derek moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations, their smiles stretched so tight I thought they might crack. They looked exactly like what they were, the hosts at their own execution. At precisely 7 o'clock, just as Derek was tapping a champagne flute with a spoon to make his grand announcement, I made my entrance. I was not alone. On my right was my lawyer, Mr. Davies, carrying a briefcase and looking like he was about to foreclose on the whole affair. On my left was Mr. Rossi, the owner of the bodega, looking deeply uncomfortable but resolute in his Sunday best. I wore a simple navy blue dress. I felt like the quiet center of a hurricane. A hush fell over the party as the three of us walked through the house and out onto the patio. Derek froze, the flute still in his hand, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated dread. I walked to the center of the patio and turned to face the guests. My voice when I spoke wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made everyone stop and listen. I started by wishing everyone a good evening. I thanked them for coming to celebrate my daughter and son-in-law's incredible good fortune. Then I told them there was just a small point of clarification I needed to make. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Mr. Davies stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and handed me the original lottery ticket, now sealed in a protective plastic sleeve. I told the crowd how my son-in-law Derek had been kind enough to check the numbers for me last week. I locked my eyes on his. I said that in all the excitement, he must have simply forgotten who the ticket belonged to. He had told me it was a loser, I explained to the silent crowd, but as it turned out, it wasn't. I held the ticket up so everyone could see the winning numbers. I told them I had bought it on a Tuesday afternoon at Rossi's Bodega on Federal Hill. And then I gestured to the man beside me. I asked Mr. Rossi if he remembered selling it to me. He cleared his throat, and his voice was thick with that old Providence accent when he confirmed that he did. He even told them how I'd used my grandson's birthday numbers just like always. Then for the final blow, I turned the ticket over to show my signature written in clear, steady ink. The law, I stated calmly, is very simple. The prize belongs to the person who signs the ticket. This ticket, I announced, is legally and rightfully mine. The breakdown was instantaneous. My daughter Lauren let out a little strangled gasp. Derek stood as if he'd been turned to stone, his face completely ashen. A wave of murmurs and whispers rippled through the party as the truth of the situation in all its ugly glory dawned on them. This wasn't a celebration. It was a public shaming. The real judgment didn't come from me. It came from the stunned, pitying, and contemptuous looks on the faces of their friends. The very people whose validation they had mortgaged their entire lives to obtain were now the front-row witnesses to their profound greed and moral collapse. I let them absorb that for a moment before I spoke again, my voice a little softer now. I said that as for the money, I would of course be paying off the debts they had accrued. I would not have my daughter and my grandchildren thrown out of their home. I saw a tiny flicker of hope in Lauren's eyes, but I extinguished it with my next words. After the debts were settled, I continued, the house would be sold. They would find a place to live that they could actually afford. All the remaining funds would be placed in a trust managed by Mr. Davies for my grandchildren's education and future. They would not have access to it. My decision, I said, was final. It wasn't cruel revenge. It was justice perfectly proportioned. I saved them from absolute ruin, but I stripped them of the fantasy they had sacrificed their integrity for. In that moment, I reclaimed control, nullified their deception, and set a boundary as hard and clear as diamond. Their social world, the only thing they had ever truly valued, now lay in ruins at their feet. You would think an explosion that big would be loud, but the aftermath was mostly silent. The guests at the party just sort of evaporated, melting away into the night. You can be sure they were all on their phones before they even reached the end of the driveway, though. The gossip left a toxic residue that clung to my daughter and son-in-law's names, and the story of the Providence ticket became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties and country club bars. Their public humiliation was total. They became social ghosts overnight. I kept my word, of course. Mr. Davies handled everything. We paid off the mountains of debt they had accrued, the mortgage, the car leases, the credit cards. It was a staggering amount, but it was a small price to pay to ensure my grandchildren wouldn't be collateral damage. The grand house was sold within a month. I saw them move into a small, nondescript rental apartment in a town over the kind of place with stark white walls and no character. The luxury cars were returned to the dealership. Their life of curated illusion was officially over. From there, the paths they took diverged. Derek, stripped of all his bravado, just seemed to shrink. He lost his high-status sales job, and the new one he found was a significant step down. He became quiet and defeated a man, haunted by the ghost of the fortune he had held in his hands for a few brief, foolish weeks. From what I heard, he never stopped being bitter, forever casting himself as the victim of his cruel mother-in-law. Lauren, however, began a slow, agonizing journey toward something like accountability. Once the buffer of credit cards and social status was gone, she was forced to look at the person she had become, and I don't think she liked what she saw. The first few months were a storm of resentment, I'm sure. But slowly, tentatively, something started to shift. She got a part-time job at a local library. She started going to therapy. Then one afternoon, about 6 months after the party, she called me. There were no excuses, no justifications. She just whispered that she was sorry, her voice cracking with the first genuine emotion I had heard from her in years. She was so sorry. As for me, I thrived. I didn't indulge in lavish spending or a dramatic new life. I set up the trust for my grandchildren, making sure their futures would be secure no matter what. I made a large donation to the community center in my old neighborhood, and I started volunteering there twice a week. My life, which had once been quiet out of necessity, was now quiet by choice. I reconnected with old friends. I took a few trips with Ellie, and I found a deep, authentic peace that money could never buy and was never the point to begin with. A year after the party, I was sitting on my front porch, the very same porch where their desperate confession had tumbled out. I was just drinking a glass of lemonade, watching the world go by. A simple, practical car pulled up to the curb, and Lauren got out. She was just wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and she looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She walked up the steps and sat on the swing beside me. We didn't speak for a long time, just sitting together in a comfortable silence, watching the afternoon fade. Our dynamic was forever changed. There was no forgetting the betrayal, but in that quiet moment, there was a fragile, nascent possibility of something new. I was strong, independent, and whole. The consequences were a lasting reality she had created for herself, a reality from which she was only now finally beginning to find her own path toward redemption. Barbara's journey reminds us that true power is rarely loud. It isn't found in a winning ticket, but in the quiet dignity of self-respect. Her final act wasn't about simple revenge. It was about proportionate justice. By saving her family from ruin, but stripping them of their fantasy. She taught a far greater lesson, that the firmest boundaries are built not just with strength, but with a deep and steady wisdom that protects what is truly valuable.